Hey guys, tonight we trudge back through the squelching mud of early 19th century Europe. You're a new recruit in Napoleon's Grand Armée and frankly you smell like it. Your boots are soggy, your socks have fused with your skin, and your extra shirt. Yes, just the one hasn't seen soap since your enlistment ceremony. Welcome to the fragrant, filth-flecked world of military laundry during the Napoleonic Wars. You probably won't survive this. At least not with clean underwear. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing our sleepy little history club grow. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your kit list is short and sweet, and by sweet I mean it smells like goat cheese left in the sun. 2 linen shirts, 1 wool coat, a pair of breeches, and some hardy woolen socks. If you're very lucky or high-ranking, you might get a spare pair of underpants. Might. You wake before dawn, packed into a tent that sleeps 8 men but smells like 80. Outside, the bugle wails. You roll out of your rough wool blanket, stepping directly onto someone's helmet. Within minutes, the entire regiment is on the move, crunching frost-covered grass. Your breath mingling with the fog rising off unwashed bodies. There's no time to launder anything. You march for hours, sometimes days, before you reach a camp where you can unstrap your pack and maybe peel off a layer. Laundry doesn't happen on command. It happens in those brief windows between hunger and exhaustion. And oh, how your clothes suffer. Marching in the rain, prepare for mildew, a summer slog through Iberia. Your shirt sticks to your back like melted parchment. In fact, soldiers developed entire techniques just to air their uniforms. One involved walking with arms spread like scarecrows to let a breeze reach their undershirts if there was a breeze. Otherwise, it was just a way to look insane to villagers watching from the hedgerows. By 1807, when Napoleon's army was slogging through Prussian roads, socks became semi-legendary objects. Wool socks wore thin quickly, and soldiers rarely had the chance or materials to darn them. You'd often swap a button or a belt buckle for a decent sock. It's said a single, reasonably dry sock could be bartered for a handful of tobacco or a good story depending on your priorities. Of course, you tried to keep your uniform looking halfway decent. This wasn't just about vanity. Officers inspected uniforms daily, and filthy gear could earn you extra duties. Latrine digging was a popular punishment, but the irony, most officers had no idea how their men could clean anything. They just expected magic. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's regulations around uniform upkeep were purely for show, or whether he genuinely believed his troops had time to boil water and starch their collars on campaign. Speaking of starch, it was a dream. You'd be lucky to get a rinse. Soap was rare, and we'll get to that soon, but right now, just imagine trying to scrub mud and gunpowder out of your trousers using creek water, your hands, prayer. Wool especially was a nightmare. You couldn't just toss it in a stream and expect it to bounce back. Get it too hot and it shrinks. Scrub too hard and it frays. So most soldiers developed a method that modern laundry connoisseurs might call laying it near a puddle and hoping for divine intervention. Some enterprising lads came up with clever workarounds. One method involved laying the shirt out on a rock and letting the morning dew soften the grime. Another trick, waiting for rain and just standing really still. It wasn't just about dirt. You had lice. Everyone had lice. They nested in your seams, your hair, your armpits. If you saw a man feverishly scratching, you didn't ask questions. You just slid a bit farther down the campfire log. The only real treatment was boiling your clothes, and boiling water out here. That meant using firewood, expensive, scarce, and better reserved for not freezing to death. But still, you tried. Maybe today you'll reach a river, maybe the water won't be brown, maybe you'll get 5 minutes to pull off your socks and see what color your feet are supposed to be. Just maybe, because there's something oddly comforting about that moment's steam rising off your only shirt as you wring it out with cracked hands, watching it go from battlefield gray to only moderately gross, a small victory. And in a war where victories were hard won and rarely clean, that little luxury mattered. So now, as your regiment sloshes across another muddy trail, you keep one eye out for a stream or even a trough or a pond that doesn't already have a dead horse in it. Laundry is a waiting game. And for now, you march soap if you're lucky. But mostly you aren't. You trudge into the next makeshift camp after 3 days of endless walking. Your socks are attempting to ferment. Your shirt now smells like a tragic cheese. And your best hope for a proper wash, a lump of soap if someone still has one, Soap, as it turns out, is a luxury item on the march, not issued, not rationed, not stocked in any meaningful way. If you want soap, you barter for it. You beg for it. You might even steal it, though, to be fair. Anyone who's hoarding a bar of soap probably smells too clean to be stealthy. What counted as soap back then could be a wide range of goops, pastes, and suspiciously lumpy bricks. Soldiers made their own when needed, mixing leftover animal fat with ashes from the campfire. If you had a dash of vinegar or even some stale urine, yes, urine, you were in business. It sounds horrifying, but chemically it checks out, and you, desperate to not smell like moldy stew, are ready to try anything. One corporal years later recalled the time he tried to make soap using tallow and black powder. It didn't clean much, but it made a decent fire starter. Another soldier swore by using boiled-down sour wine with crushed chalk to scrub stains from his coat. Historians still argue whether that was innovation or sheer boredom. The more fortunate troops had wives or girlfriends or unofficial camp followers who might sneak them a real bar of Marseille soap. These fragrant olive oil-based blocks were the gold standard. Smooth, gentle on fabric, and when rationed properly could stretch for weeks. But on campaign, you might as well be washing with a slice of lard wrapped in a prayer. You find yourself crouched by a shallow creek. Your fingers are numb, but you dip a rag into the icy water and begin to rub at the crusted sweat ring on your collar. The motion is mostly symbolic. Without soap, you're just moving the grime around like a very tired abstract artist. A neighbor nearby pulls something from a pouch, a small grayish nub. "Real soap," he whispers dramatically. "Cost me half a loaf of bread." You eye it like a man spotting treasure, because in this army, bread and soap are practically interchangeable currencies. If a man is clean, he's either loved, wealthy, or suspicious. That's not to say soldiers didn't develop their own hacks. Some used sand or coarse cloth to scrub their skin, essentially homemade exfoliation. Others just bathed in whatever stream or ditch they passed, rubbing furiously with bare hands. And hoping for the best, you learn quickly that smells become relative. After a while, everyone stinks, but the type of stink varies. There's gunpowder stink, foot rot stink, musty coat stink, and the particularly acrid "I haven't washed since Bavaria" variety. You learn to pick them apart like a sommelier of sweat. One evening, you hear singing soft, lilting French. You wander over to a cluster of soldiers who've built a small fire. A kettle bubbles over it. They're rendering animal fat, stirring with a bayonet. One man adds ashes, another shaves a bar of something that might have once been lye. They're making soap, sort of. You ask to trade for a handful. They laugh, offering you a tiny ball of the gooey mess in exchange for your last spoonful of coffee. You consider it. You really consider it. Soap becomes more than hygiene. It's hope, it's agency, it's a way to draw the line between surviving and simply existing. Washing your shirt doesn't just make you cleaner, it reminds you that you're still a person, not just a number in the endless churn of war. There's a kind of quiet pride when you do manage a wash day. You stand by the water, slapping your shirt against a rock, watching dirt and regret swirl downstream. You wring it out and drape it over a low bush to dry. The sun hits it just right. And for a moment, it's easy to pretend that you're just a traveler on a peaceful hike. Then you remember your shirt will probably reek of wet sheep by morning, and the soap you used has left your hands smelling like old stew meat. But still, you tried, and that counts. Not every army had it this bad. British troops were famously issued blocks of soap as part of their standard rations, but even then, soldiers used it sparingly. Some hoarded it for sale, others simply didn't bother Napoleon for all his attention to detail. Never formalized hygiene routines beyond vague guidelines. The assumption was figure it out, or suffer, probably both. Scholars still debate whether the lack of standardized hygiene played a role in the many illnesses that ravaged Napoleon's troops, especially during the Egypt campaign where disease outpaced bullets in taking lives. Poor sanitation, bad water, or just a shortage of soap. The truth probably lies in all three, plus a strong dash of overconfidence. And so, as you sit cross-legged beside a puddle, scrubbing your undershirt with half a root vegetable and a deep sense of futility, you wonder, is this what glory smells like? Short answer, yes. It smells like onions, damp wool, and the faintest whiff of vinegar soap made in a tin cup. You've finally found a stream. Not wide, not clean, but it's moving, which already puts it ahead of the puddle. You washed your face in yesterday. You drop to your knees and begin the ritual. Sleeves rolled, boots off, socks peeled like aged bark. The cold bites your fingertips the moment they hit the water, but you bear it, because this is Laundry Day, and Laundry Day is sacred. Except, of course, you're not alone. To your left, a dozen cavalry. Horses are being led directly into the stream, their hooves churning the water into a cloudy broth of silt and horsey leftovers. To your right, another soldier is unceremoniously using the downstream bend as his personal latrine. You sigh deeply, so this is it. This is your laundromat. Back in the safety of peacetime, or at least not being shot at time, you might expect clean water, a little privacy, and maybe even a tub. Here, it's all communal. If you want to wash, you better be comfortable, elbow to elbow with your comrades. And they're unmentionables. It doesn't help that rivers were multi-purpose zones. You'd see soldiers filling canteens, bathing, rinsing shirts, watering horses, and yes, relieving themselves all within a few dozen meters. There was no zoning, no signs saying, no socks. Beyond this point, you just had to guess where the current flowed strongest, and hope your rinse wasn't also someone else's rinse. Or worse. Some tried clever tactics going upstream in the dead of night to get the pure water before everyone else. Others claim to have found secret springs only to return mysteriously sick the next day. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's campaigns were undone more by dysentery than by the Russians. Certainly disease killed more soldiers than bullets, and poor hygiene played its villainous part. But today you're desperate. You ball up your filthy shirt and dunk it quickly, as if the water's judgment will lessen if you're fast. You squeeze it out, slap it on a rock, then repeat. You're scrubbing with a cloth you've dubbed the Grime Tamer, which used to be a sock before it tragically lost its twin in Bavaria. The sound of wet fabric hitting stone is oddly meditative, like a rhythmic patter meant to soothe, not clean. And that's the irony. Laundry on the march is rarely effective. Most soldiers don't get their clothes clean, they just make, to them, less awful. The goal is not sparkle, it's survival. And yet, there's something almost therapeutic about it. As your arms move in that repetitive motion, your mind drifts. You remember the last time you saw your home basin, maybe a mother's hand gently wringing linens, a lover's scarf, the smell of rose water, of safety, of soap that didn't have bones in it. A gust of wind pulls you back, your damp socks balanced precariously on a bush branch are now floating away downstream. You scramble after them, slipping on the mossy stones, cursing softly as you retrieve what is now a sopping, muddy version of its former self. Another soldier sees you and chuckles. It's not laundry day until someone falls in, he says, slapping his thigh like he's just invented comedy. You grin. Not because it's funny, but because he's right. There's always that guy. Napoleon's armies weren't known for luxurious camp conditions. When they did set up temporary rest areas, water sources were first come, first fouled. You might find the engineers upstream with their immaculate uniforms and carefully boiled water, while the infantry mashed through swampy reeds, looking for even a trickle. There are a few who try to enforce rules. Officers sometimes assign zones telling units to bathe upstream and water animals downstream. But in the chaos of setting up a mobile town of thousands in a single afternoon, enforcement falls flat. And by the time anyone notices, half the company has trench foot and a river-borne illness with a Latin name you'll never pronounce. Still, you find your rhythm. You've got one shirt drying on a stick, another wrapped around your canteen to stretch out the collar, and your pants are draped over a low bush where they flutter like a defeated flag. Your boots, meanwhile, haven't been washed in months. You scrape them with a rock and consider it done. Footwear was precious. You didn't dunk leather unless you wanted to march barefoot by Thursday. A sudden splash breaks your focus. Someone's horse has decided to sit in the stream. The rider screams. You just sigh again. That horse is now part of your laundry process. It's worth noting, rivers weren't just utilities. They were also gathering places. This was where gossip flowed as freely as water. You'd hear who got demoted, who ran off with a washerwoman, which officer was hoarding tobacco. You'd share. Stories grumble about rations, maybe sing a verse or two of a marching tune that's older than your grandmother's broom. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't effective, but it was yours. And sometimes when the sky pinked up and the bugs stopped biting, it almost felt like peace. So you keep scrubbing, keep splashing, keep praying the soap. If you have any holds out, just one more wash, because tomorrow brings another march, another rainstorm, another layer of mud. But tonight, for a moment, you can almost smell something clean. You hear them before you see them, laughter sharp and loud, ringing through the trees like cannon fire with better punchlines. Then the singing starts. Not from the men, no. These voices are higher, brasher, and infinitely more confident. The vivandières have arrived, or maybe they've been here all along, quietly setting up their makeshift laundry line behind a rock outcrop, boiling linens over fire pits, chattering like sparrows with no sense of fear. Because fear, it seems, has long since left the women behind. You probably know them by their other names, cantinières, sutlers, or simply the laundresses. But don't let the title fool you. These aren't just women who scrub your socks. These are warriors in their own right, not formally enlisted. Not always. Paid and never officially saluted, but everyone in camp knows without them the army falls apart. They sell tobacco, they patch uniforms, they mend broken spirits with soup and sass. And yes, they wash clothes, often in freezing rivers surrounded by men, horses, and danger, all while arguing about which general has the worst handwriting. You approach cautiously. One woman is wringing out a blood-stained tunic with the strength of 10 oxen. She's got forearms like tree trunks and a glare that could sink a gunboat. Next to her, a younger woman stirs a pot of boiling water with what might be a tent peg. Laundry day has officially turned professional. Vivandières weren't a uniform group. Some were wives of soldiers, others were enterprising civilians who saw an opportunity and seized it with both soap-covered hands. They traveled with the regiments, set up camps, tended to the wounded, and occasionally picked up a musket when things got hairy. One famous vivandière, Marie Tête de Fer, Mary Ironhead, was known not only for her impeccable washing, but for the pistol she kept tucked in her corset. Legend says she shot a Prussian who tried to steal her wash basin. Historians still argue whether she existed or was an amalgam of multiple fierce women, but the fact that soldiers believed in her, that says enough. As you hand over your shirt with a sheepish look, the older woman snorts. "Is this even worth saving?" she asks. You chuckle awkwardly and say something about cannon soot, she replies with. "Smells more like cheese and despair." She takes it anyway. They've set up their operation on the riverbank, away from where the horses do their business. Flat stones serve as scrub surfaces, iron pots bubble with linen, a mixture of ash, fat, and what smells suspiciously like cabbage lines strung. Between trees sway gently in the breeze, hosting a patchwork quilt of regimental underwear. You watch them work, and it's mesmerizing. Their hands move with practiced rhythm. Slap, scrub, twist, rinse. One hums a lullaby, which she turns mid-note into a bawdy tavern song. Another flicks water at a soldier loitering too close. Misses. But the intention lands. The vivandières are also the army's gossip network. They know who's been demoted, who's sneaking into whose tent, and which officer lost his dignity and his pants in a card game last night. If there were a Napoleonic version of social media, it would be these women and their laundry lines. Their presence adds color to the grim monotony of camp life. Soldiers joke with them, flirt clumsily, trade buttons or rations for a cleaner collar. Some even fall in love. Others fall into a heap when they try to match them drink for drink. Of course, not everyone welcomed them. Officers sometimes viewed them as a distraction or a nuisance. Too noisy, too bold, too female. But even the grumpiest commander knew better than to cross them outright. You need someone to wash the blood out of your breeches after a battle. Better not insult the only person willing to touch them. One officer, known for his obsessive cleanliness, reportedly demanded his shirts be bleached to the whiteness of alpine snow. A vivandière reportedly returned them with a note: "Try marching in the Alps next time." Laundry wasn't just about hygiene here, it was about morale. A clean shirt could mean the difference between despair and dignity. The vivandières knew that. They didn't just wash clothes, they reminded you of who you were beneath grime. That said, their work was brutal. Freezing water, endless scrubbing, and the constant threat of violence not just from enemies but sometimes from the very men they served. They formed tight-knit cliques, protected one another, and carried knives hidden in skirts. You didn't mess with them, not twice. Tonight, one of them offers you a mug of something that smells like boiled bark, and hope you drink it. It's terrible. She laughs. You laugh. Someone nearby starts singing again, and soon the whole riverbank is a chorus of off-key soldiers, giggling washerwomen, and fluttering underpants catching the firelight like banners. There's a quiet dignity to it all. Amid the mud, the misery, and the overwhelming smell of wet wool, the vivandières bring a sense of normalcy, a touch of home scrubbed and wrung out over a pot of ash water stew. Your shirt returns warm and still damp, but noticeably less haunted. You thank the woman, and she waves you off already, plunging another tunic into her bubbling cauldron like a wizard banishing demons. As you walk away, you feel a little lighter, not just because your shirt no longer stands up on its own, but because for a moment, around that fire in the echo of laughter and soap bubbles, you remembered what it was like to be human. Camp settles as the sun dips behind a ridge of trees, casting long golden streaks over the patchwork tents and clattering tin pots. You take your place near the fire, stretching out your still damp shirt beside it, hoping the smoke will chase off what water the sun could not. Welcome to the gentle art of drying laundry by campfire, also known as turning your clothes into smoked jerky. Your shirt crackles slightly as it crisps over a stick propped between two bayonets. You rotate it like a campfire marshmallow, unsure whether you're drying it or baking it into submission. Every soldier has their method. Some string their garments on ramrods, some fashion clotheslines from musket straps, and others, especially the lazy or bold, just lay their damp uniforms directly on the coals, then act surprised when it combusts. One fellow in your company once lost a perfectly decent pair of drawers this way. One moment he was fanning them with his forage cap, the next he was patting himself with his own canteen to put out the fire. The smell lingered for days. Historians still argue whether the scent of burning linen was more traumatic than cannon smoke. But drying by fire was more than risky, it was a performance. Around the campfires, each soldier guarded their laundry like precious treasure. Sparks with the enemy, wind, a traitor, a sudden gust could send your only sock into the flames, or carry it off entirely, never to be seen again, fluttering like a ghostly flag into the night sky. The smarter among you learned to weigh clothes down with stones. Even smarter ones traded wet garments for dry ones, with the vivandiers usually at steep rates, half a ration, a shiny button, or the whispered promise of future favors. Occasionally, some enterprising lad would borrow an unattended shirt, only to later find it and claim a reward for returning it. And people say war lacks creativity. Of course, drying wasn't just about fire. If the weather allowed, meaning not actively snowing or raining, sideways soldiers would drape their garments over bushes, tree limbs, abandoned wagons, or even sleeping comrades. There's at least one report of a French infantryman drying socks on a sleeping grenadier's mustache. The accuracy of this anecdote is debated, but its spirit entirely believable. You glance around and see the whole camp festooned with damp linens. It's like a traveling laundry circus. Trousers hang from rifles jammed into the ground. Undershirts wave like banners from tent poles. Someone's breeches are drying on the back of a mule who seems entirely indifferent to their new role as a drying rack. And the smoke, thick, cloying, almost comforting, infuses everything. Not just your shirt, but your nostrils, your hair, your soul. When you pull on the newly dried garment, it feels stiff like baked parchment, but it smells like pine wood and ash. Instead of welder feet, it's an upgrade. Fire drying had its benefits, though. It killed lice. Mostly, at least it convinced them to migrate. Some soldiers swore that holding your seams near the hottest part of the flame caused the tiny pests to pop like corn kernels. It's horrifying. It's unverified, and yes, you probably try it anyway. The downside, naturally, is when you get too close. The delicate balance between toasty and ablaze is thinner than a French ration biscuit. You start by cautiously roasting your socks, then in a moment of distraction, maybe someone shouts about an officer tripping over a mule. You turn back and realize your entire shirt is now an accidental torch. In those moments, you face the classic Napoleonic laundry dilemma: scream and save it, or pretend you didn't like that shirt anyway and act very casual. Once a fellow soldier tried to speed up the drying process by swinging his shirt over the fire like a pizza chef with dough. The wind caught it. The flames did the rest. He wore his greatcoat directly over bare skin for the next 3 days and refused to make eye contact. But fire wasn't the only hazard. Animals loved warm, salty fabric. Dogs would run off with drying breeches. Crows were known to peck buttons, clean off hanging shirts. A goat once ate a sergeant's sock and part of his disciplinary notebook. That goat may have been promoted. Despite the risks, drying by fire was an unspoken ritual. It gave you time to be still, to sit with your thoughts, or with a friend who might let you warm your feet under their coat. Stories were swapped, songs mumbled, and complaints filed vocally into the ether. And, all the while, the fire worked its slow magic on the garments of war. The paradox, of course, was that even freshly dried clothes rarely felt clean. The smell might shift, but the stiffness, the stains, and the ghost of mildew lingered. Some soldiers even preferred the scent of sweat to the acrid blend of smoke, soap, and wet wool. Yet even the illusion of cleanliness boosted morale to put on a shirt that wasn't sopping wet, that didn't squelch under your arms. That was, dare you say it, warm. That was luxury. It's strange, isn't it? In the middle of battlefields, sieges, and forced marches, one of the most vivid memories many veterans recounted was that quiet moment by the fire shirt, steaming gently, laughter nearby, the bitter cold held off for just a little while longer. And so you sit watching your socks stiffen into crinkled scrolls, and you feel for the first time in days almost civilized. Tomorrow you'll march again, and your clothes will soak through within the first mile, but tonight you smell like someone who has tried. And that's more than enough. Uniform regulations in Napoleon's army are a masterpiece of irony. On paper, every soldier is meant to present a model of discipline and hygiene: coat buttoned just so, cravat, crisp boots, shined, and linen dazzlingly white. You, however, are currently wearing a coat that has been re-dyed by trench mud, a shirt that smells like a damp cupboard in an abandoned monastery, and socks that feel like they might stage a rebellion of their own. The rules say one thing, the battlefield says another. There were entire manuals, yes, actual printed manuals dictating how soldiers should maintain their dress. Officers were expected to enforce these standards with firm inspections. You imagine the absurdity of this as your sergeant walks by, barely hiding his own eau de gunpowder, and regret barking at you to polish your boots, which are caked in half of Saxony. You quickly learn that regulation uniform was more of an aspirational goal than a lived reality. The minute a campaign began, chaos reigned. Uniforms were torn, swapped, sold, or converted into bandages. Some soldiers patched their coats with whatever cloth they could find, tartan from a looted Scottish shipment, burlap sacks, or once someone's grandmother's lace curtain. Historians still argue whether those fashion choices were out of desperation or a very early attempt at couture. Still, hygiene was recognized as important. Even Napoleon himself, despite his reputation for being less than fastidious, understood that filth meant disease, and disease killed armies faster than musket balls. So his staff issued orders encouraging cleanliness, like bathing when possible, boiling, drinking water, and yes, washing one's clothes. But enforcement, that depended on where you ranked. If you were a general, your uniforms were tailored, starched, and pressed by aides who carried entire luggage sets of backup cravats. If you were an officer, you had valets who made sure you smelled at least marginally presentable at dinner. You? Were you an ordinary soldier? You had a rock, a river, and a prayer. One corporal, fed up with the hypocrisy, reportedly showed up to inspection wearing his trousers backwards as a form of protest. His logic: they'd be dirtier on the front anyway. He was promptly ordered to dig latrines for a week. You grow to understand that inspections weren't really about actual cleanliness, they were about the appearance of discipline. Soldiers learned to cheat the system: muddy coat, rub more mud on until it looked intentional, smelly shirt, hang it over your mess tin, and claim it was air-dried in herbs, lice, pretend to itch from battle stress. It was theater, and you learned your lines fast. One trick involved rubbing chalk or flour onto the shirt collar to make it appear whiter. Another involved shaving soot into your boots to make them look freshly blackened. Did it help with hygiene? No. Did it stop your lieutenant from assigning extra duty? Occasionally. You begin to see how the gap between written regulation and field reality stretches wider with every mile marched. Still, some rules stuck. The button polishing obsession, for instance. Brass buttons were to shine. Always soldiers carry scraps of cloth specifically for buffing them. You've seen men polish buttons while under artillery fire. Priorities. Then there's the eternal struggle with undergarments. Regulation mentioned underdrawers. Most soldiers had none, and those who did rarely kept them too bulky, too hard to wash, too easy to lose during a surprise river crossing. But let's not forget the boots. Boots were sacred. Napoleon's infamous fast marches meant your feet were your lifeline, and those regulation boots, technically supposed to be kept dry, oiled, and upright, quickly became mangled, sagging, mud-caked things. Soldiers stuffed them with straw, wore them until the soles flapped like tongues, and occasionally bartered for better ones with desperate villagers. Yet despite it all, you keep trying. Because there's something defiant about pulling on your best shirt, even if it's still damp and smells vaguely of horse, and standing in formation with your head high. You may be filthy, but you are present. You are dressed. You are still part of the machine. And that strange dignity carries you. You remember seeing a veteran once, an old grenadier with a face like a folded map. His uniform was in tatters, but every morning without fail he would wet a comb, slick back his hair, and tuck a sprig of dried lavender into his buttonhole. Not because anyone ordered him to, but because that was how he reminded himself he was a soldier, not an animal. Historians still debate whether these small rituals of cleanliness had measurable effects on morale. But anyone who's lived through the damp stink of trench life knows a clean shirt, even for 1 hour, can feel like a miracle. So you adapt. You hide the worst of the stains. You brush off the most offensive clumps of dried soup. You arrange your gear so the good side faces outward, and when the officer strolls past, you stand straight proud and hope he doesn't. Sniff? Too hard. The rules were never meant to be followed to the letter. They were meant to keep order, to inspire pride, to stop everyone from turning into wild-eyed swamp creatures. And they sort of worked if you squint. So here you are, arms outstretched like laundry yourself, waiting for your smoke-dried shirt to finish stiffening into wearable armor. The regulations said it should be clean, pressed, and white. It is none of those things, but it's dry. It's yours. And tomorrow it'll do. You're inspecting your coat like it's a battlefield map. There are splashes of brown mud, gravy, possibly both. A dark smear from gunpowder on your right sleeve. Some vague greenish something on the hem that you hope is just grass. And near the collar, a bright, sunny blotch of mustard. You don't even remember eating mustard. Laundry in Napoleon's army wasn't just about dirt. It was about what kind of dirt. Because there's a strange logic among soldiers. Some stains you remove, others you wear with pride. Blood, for instance, that's complicated. Some soldiers scrub it out frantically, worried about infection, smell, or superstition. Others leave it in proof of valor, proof of survival, proof that they were there. One grenadier was once overheard saying, "I won't wash out the blood. It's all I earned from that miserable hill." Grease, less noble, more slippery. Lard butter oil from cooking it all had a way of embedding itself into wool, like a stubborn ghost. A drop on your breeches might grow over the weeks into a shiny badge of honor that smells faintly of stew. Try scrubbing it with ash, then with sand, then just ignore it entirely and tell people it's a map of the Rhine. Historians still debate the psychology behind this selective cleanliness. Why were soldiers so determined to keep their boots polished, yet content to let their collars rot? Was it practicality, ritual, or just a collective decision that some stains mattered more than others? And then there were the weird ones, like the mystery purple mark that appeared on your trousers after the blueberry incident in Württemberg. It resists all soap, all scrubbing, and now functions as a sort of social icebreaker. Ah, yes, someone might say, I too had the bilberry soup. One soldier you knew, Jacques, from the third line, had a patch of dried blood on his coat he called Josephine. He claimed it formed in the shape of a heart. It didn't. It looked more like a lopsided shoe. But no one dared correct him. It was all he had left from that charge. Then there's the soot. Always soot. From campfires, from cannon blasts, from torches. It lines the inside of your sleeves, the edge of your cuffs, even the folds of your cravat, if you're lucky enough to wear one. Some soldiers embraced it. Camouflage, they'd call it, with a wink, while others spent every spare second brushing it away with a bit of horsehair and desperation. A trick you pick up early is what the others call the flip. You wear the cleanest shirt inside out. If the outside looks clean, no one checks the smell. Same with breeches. Twist them at the waist, fold over the stains. You become a master at hiding grease, smudges, and mysterious smells beneath clever folds and confident posture. Oddly enough, officers were more forgiving about food stains than they were about loose buttons, a soup blotch. Understandable. Missing epaulets. Unforgivable. One sergeant major nearly caused a duel over a missing brass clasp. The accused, he'd melted it down to plug a hole in his mess tin. Priorities, really. Your fellow soldiers have their own stain philosophies. Maurice insists on soaking everything in vinegar to purify the threads. Pierre simply layers multiple shirts, claiming the top one acts like a napkin. And Léon just says, "I spill," then promptly drops his stew on his lap. The truth is, laundry was rarely thorough. It was strategic. You didn't aim for clean, you aimed for less alarming. You targeted stains like a sniper, prioritizing the ones that attracted flies, offended officers, or reminded you of that time you fell into a goose pond. But there was one thing nearly every soldier agreed on: lice must go. Filthy shirts were tolerable, lice were not. So even if you didn't scrub out the mustard, you boiled your seams, you held your coat over the fire, you crushed eggs between Fingernails. Clean clothes. Optional, lice-free, essential. The smell, of course, was the ever-present companion, a mingling of sweat, leather, smoke, and time. Some days your coat seemed to develop its own personality, like a slightly malevolent roommate. You'd wake up and it would smell different. Angrier. More fermented. Yet, despite all this, there was a kind of personal pride that emerged. You might not be able to wash everything, but you'd find small victories, a cravat, rinsed and dried in secret, a sock that somehow smelled better than it did yesterday, a new grease spot that you successfully disguised with charcoal dust, and there were stories behind the stains, the splash of burgundy on your cuff from when someone dropped a bottle of wine during the siege of Ulm, the odd yellowish smudge from that one time you tried to cook egg over a rifle barrel, the ink blot from writing a letter home under the rain. You begin to realize your uniform is your story, a living, breathing journal of your time in the army. Each mark, each threadbare patch, each whiff of battlefield stew, it's all part of the record. So tonight, as you hold your coat over the fire, eyeing that persistent mustard bloom with weary affection, you decide to leave it. It's not hurting anyone, and it's probably the best-smelling part of the whole ensemble. Besides, if anyone asks, you'll just say it's a family crest. You wake early, not from the bugle this time, but from the sound of your name being butchered by a half-asleep corporal. It's laundry inspection again. You sigh, stretch, and reach for the shirt that's only mildly damp instead of soaked. But you already know how this will go, because the officer doing the rounds today, he's one of them. An officer who travels with a manservant. A manservant who irons his cravats using a heated brick wrapped in flannel. You, on the other hand, just discovered a beetle in your boot. The officer strides down the line with a posture so straight it could slice bread. His coat gleams, his gloves are spotless. He pauses in front of you, eyes narrowing at your collar, which you've flipped to hide the coffee stain from 3 days ago. Bit wrinkled, he mutters, moving on. You nearly laugh out loud, bit wrinkled. If he saw the inside of your coat, he'd knight your lice for bravery. That's the truth of it. There were 2 worlds in Napoleon's army. The enlisted men who cleaned their uniforms with rocks, vinegar, and tears, and the officers who traveled with entire mobile wardrobes packed in fancy leather trunks, lined with cedar shavings to keep the smell of war at bay. Officers' uniforms were often made from finer material wool of better quality, lined in silk, stitched by actual tailors who knew the meaning of the word inseam. Your uniform, it came out of a barrel, got fitted with a bayonet hole already, included and smelled like dried onions from the first day. And yet, the contrast didn't stop there. Officers had servants, valets, whose full-time job was to ensure that the man they served looked like he hadn't walked 50 kilometers through mud, sleet, and indignity. These valets knew how to pack uniforms, so they wouldn't wrinkle, how to dry boots without cracking the leather, and how to remove bloodstains with ash and lemon juice, when lemon juice could be found, which was not often. You once overheard an aide-de-camp complaining that his collar starch was too stiff. You were at the time attempting to cook beans in a helmet. Officers didn't just have better clothing, they had options. Multiple coats, spare breeches, silk stockings, actual soap often scented. One rumor in your camp held that a certain general used rose water to rinse his undergarments. The man next to you tried that once with soup. It didn't end well. Still, rank had its burdens. Officers were expected to lead by example. That meant spotless boots, polished brass, perfect posture, and the illusion of control even when nothing made sense. While you might sleep in a trench using your coat as a blanket and your pack as a pillow, your captain would be awake at dawn, trimming his mustache to regulation length. Historians still argue whether these grooming rituals were born of arrogance or the sheer necessity of maintaining a facade in the face of chaos. And yet, you learn from them. You start to mimic some of their habits when possible. You sharpen your creases using a heated spoon. You rub chalk into your seams to make them appear brighter. You begin folding your coat the same way each night, if only to convince yourself that you can still fold something other than surrender. One officer, surprisingly kind for someone who smells like lavender, shares a trick with you, pressing a cravat using a warm mess lid and a bit of sand as a weight. It works. You press your collar for the first time in weeks and feel strangely civilized. You try not to smile, but you do. Just a little. There's a strange intimacy in watching an officer's valet work. You catch glimpses, usually during camp downtime, the careful brushing, the mending the way they steam, wrinkles out, using a kettle and a blanket tent. It's like watching someone prep for a stage role. And, in a way, that's what it is. Officers knew their appearance mattered. Cleanliness meant command. A wrinkled officer looked weak, a dirty one unprepared. So their uniforms were weapons too, ones of perception, intimidation, and self-respect. Back in the ranks you trade stories of officer laundry drama, the time a general's valise was lost during a river crossing, and he had to wear an enlisted coat for 2 whole days. The horror or the moment an aide set fire to a cravat, while trying to dry it over a candle, it burst into flames mid-briefing. No casualties, just scorched dignity. Yet, for all their advantages, officers envied your freedom, your stains, honorable, your ragged coat, proof of service. You didn't need pressed pleats to inspire trust, you just needed to be there, boots laced, rifle loaded, ready to march. And so tonight, as you lay out your shirt near the fire, you try something new. You press a fold into the sleeve using the warm edge of your canteen. It's not perfect, but it's an attempt, a little nod to that world of hot bricks and cravat. Starch. You may not have a valet, you may not even have dry socks, but you do have pride, and sometimes even that is enough to feel like a king. You wake up to a breeze, not the gentle kind that rustles trees and whispers poetic thoughts. No, this is the sharp, irreverent kind that whips through camp like a thief, stealing warmth, flipping hats, and today, snatching your last semi-dry pair of socks clean off your bayonet. You bolt upright just in time to watch them tumble through the air like twin woolen ghosts, some assaulting over a cook fire past the latrine trench and landing squarely in a puddle that may have once aspired to be a pond. A perfect start. Drying clothes in Napoleon's army was always a gamble. You never had enough rope, you never had enough clothespins, because clothespins didn't exist. And the drying rack was whatever was long, sharp, or vaguely horizontal. Today it was your bayonet. Yesterday it was the barrel of your musket. Tomorrow, possibly a church pew if one could be stolen or repurposed in time. Your fellow soldiers are already engaged in the morning ritual of laundry recovery. Across the camp, shirts flap from tent poles like surrender flags. Breeches sway from ramrods. Undergarments dangle off sword hilts like ironic trophies. Pierre, your neighbor with the eternal sniffle, has devised a drying technique he proudly calls the pyramid. He sticks 3 rifles into the ground, teepee style, then drapes his shirt over them. It sort of works, until someone bumps it. Then, the pyramid becomes a puddle sculpture. There's artistry in this chaos. A man once dried his socks by laying them on a flat stone and singing to them, not because it helped, he just liked the idea of serenading his toes back to health. But the real prize, height. The higher your drying spot, the faster the wind and sun work their magic. So soldiers climbed trees, scaled low buildings, or stacked barrels to reach prime drying zones. One bold soul even tried stringing a line between 2 cavalry horses. It worked briefly until one horse bolted and took a pair of underpants on a wild gallop across the field. Historians still argue whether that was a logistical failure or one of the army's earliest attempts at morale-boosting entertainment. Churches were particular favorites. Well, what was left of them? After battles, abandoned chapels often became shelters, soup kitchens, or glorified drying rooms. Pew backs were perfect for draping wet coats, pulpits made great shelves, and more. Then one soldier claimed to have hung his breeches from a crucifix with an apology and a quick prayer. You do what you can. There's a man in your regiment, Francois the improviser, who once stitched buttons to the corners of his shirts so he could fasten them between poles. He now runs the unofficial drying service of your division. For a slice of bread or a dull coin, he'll set up your laundry on his homemade rig, a series of ropes, tent pegs, and possibly stolen fencing wire. His nickname used to be the Rat. Now it's Monsieur Ling. And when there's no rope, you make do. Soldiers used belts, rifles, slings, torn suspenders. One man even tried using spaghetti. He swore it worked. No one believed him. Windy days were a mixed blessing. Clothes dried faster, but they also disappeared faster. A strong gust could lift a shirt straight into a tree, or worse, across enemy lines. There's at least one tale of a Prussian soldier receiving a French undershirt via wind delivery and, confused but practical, wearing it into battle. It may be apocryphal, but then again, laundry is a universal language. You find your soggy socks crumpled and defeated. You wring them out with a noise that sounds like a dying frog, then pin them gently, this time on the muzzle of your musket. You stab it into the ground at a careful angle and whisper encouragement to the wool. Laundry has become ritual now, a strange meditation. You pace, you check the sun, you test the dampness with a finger and frown like a chef appraising a disappointing soufflé. One man tries to dry his shirt by waving it like a flag while marching in circles. It's not effective, but it's oddly motivational. The officers naturally have lines strung between tent poles with guards to shoo away pigeons and nosy privates. Their garments flap neatly in rows, white pressed smug. You try not to look, but even they suffer from the elements. One stormy night, an entire regiment's washing was swept into a ditch, and for days afterward shirts turned up on bayonets, tree limbs, and once tangled in a goat's horns. That goat became camp legend. There's a moment, rare but golden, when everything aligns, the sun shines, the wind cooperates, and your shirt, your ridiculous twice-dyed onion-scented shirt, finally flaps dry and warm in the breeze. You take it down with reverence. Like retrieving a relic, you shake it once, you smile. You pull it on. It's stiff, yes, and smells vaguely of whatever Francois cooks in his socks, but it's dry, blessedly, gloriously dry, and that's enough to make you feel ready. Ready for the next march, ready for the next storm, ready maybe to steal a church pew. Bite yourself next time you see one. Because in this army, a dry shirt is worth more than a medal. You haven't felt your feet in hours. They're still attached that much you're fairly sure of, but sensation. Gone, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache and a creeping cold that's worked its way up past your ankles, and is now considering whether to annex your knees. You're on forced march again, the kind where rest means 10 minutes sitting on your pack while your socks freeze into stiff scrolls. The mud is halfway up your shins, the snow has begun to fall sideways, and you can feel last night's soup sloshing somewhere inside your left boot. This, as the veterans say with grim humor, is not a laundry day. When Napoleon's army moved, it moved dozens of miles per day, sometimes more. The emperor believed speed was victory, his soldiers believed speed was pain, and in all that movement, through forest, bog, alpine pass, or shattered village there, was exactly zero opportunity to stop and do your laundry. So you wore it, you kept wearing it, you slept in it, you sweated in it, you bled in it, and if you were especially unlucky, you lost one sock during a river crossing, and just kept going. You remember one grim week in Saxony, where your regiment was on the move for 5 days straight. No tents, no hot meals, no spare socks. Just marching. The kind of marching that frays your soul like a rope in a grinder. Your shirt stiff with salt from dried sweat. Your breeches splattered with mud grease and memories you'd rather not identify. Eventually, even you start to give up on cleanliness. What's the point of washing when the very next step will undo it all? But there's danger in that thinking. And not just the olfactory kind. Lice thrive in unwashed uniforms. They bite, they burrow, they lay eggs in seams. By day 3 of a forced march, your collar itches with the fury of 1,000 tiny saboteurs. Your only defense is to strip layers whenever you stop and do what soldiers euphemistically call the scratch and slap dance. It's not graceful, it's not effective, but it's something. Historians still argue whether lice outbreaks did more to lower morale than cold rations or lost battles. What's certain is that they were constant companions, especially during retreats when order breaks down, supplies vanish, and hygiene becomes a luxury for the living. The retreat from Russia in 1812, a nightmare of filth. Soldiers marched with frostbitten toes, ragged coats and undergarments that hadn't seen water since the Niemen River. Laundry impossible. Even undressing was dangerous. One soldier reportedly froze solid halfway through pulling off his shirt. His comrades buried him still tangled in the sleeves. Napoleon's own memoirs gloss over these little details. He talks of glory of strategy, of flanking maneuvers. He doesn't mention the smell or the sores or the snow-soaked boots turned to icy tombs for feet long past feeling. You remember a Corporal Julian who used to soak his socks in alcohol to kill bacteria. Worked sort of until he ran out of alcohol and started drinking his sock wash solution. Instead, he claimed it cleared the sinuses. He also once tried to cook soup in his helmet using a candle. Desperation is a great inventor. When there was a moment to rest, just a stolen hour, you did what you could. Rinse your scarf, rub your boots with bacon grease to keep them pliable, brush snow from your collar and pretend it helped. Sometimes you'd share boiled water and dunk a handkerchief, wringing it out over your hands, just for the illusion of warmth. But usually, you just kept moving. You've heard of some soldiers sewing strips of cloth into the armpits of their uniforms, primitive sweat pads to be replaced later. It's clever. You tried it once. They froze within the hour and turned into crunchy, semi-attached ice sculptures. And yet, even in this mess, there are moments. You pass a village long abandoned and spot a line strung between two trees, on it fluttering gently in the bitter wind, a shirt white clean, forgotten by someone or left behind like a ghost. You don't touch it superstition, but it stirs. Something, a reminder of what normal felt like. Because that's the thing. Laundry wasn't just laundry, it was civilization. A pause, a breath, a protest against the mud, the cold, the endlessness of it all. Even now, as your socks squelch with each step and your coat stiffens like armor, you imagine the next rest, point a fire, a pot, maybe a stream that isn't frozen solid. Maybe you'll wash your cravat, or at least air it, or at least look at it and sigh wistfully. That's the funny thing about hope. It survives where soap doesn't. So you keep marching, keep adjusting your pack, keep scratching your shoulder where the lice are having a festival, and as the snow bites deeper and the sky darkens, you promise yourself, next chance you get, you'll wash something, even if it's just your hands, even if it's just symbolic. Because even on retreat, especially on retreat, you have to remind yourself that you're still human. There's a rare blessed pause in the fighting. Not silence, never silence, but a lull. No thunder of cannon, no orders screamed over musket fire, just the muffled shuffling of boots, the creak of leather, and the occasional tin cup clattering against a rock. A moment to breathe. And in this strange pocket of calm between one horror and the next, something remarkable happens: laundry. Yes, actual laundry. Not just rinsing socks in a ditch, but a full-blown organized affair. Soap, real soap, appears mysteriously traded for who knows what. Buckets are fetched, water is boiled, and soon the camp becomes a symphony of sloshing, scrubbing, and contented humming. You almost don't recognize the place. A sergeant strolls by with sleeves rolled and a shirt so stained it looks like a map of old Europe. He dunks it in a pot with exaggerated ceremony. For luck, he says. You nod solemnly. You both know it's probably the only wash it get this season. Laundry during these peacetime pauses takes on a festival feel. Men spread garments across bushes, tents, tree branches, anything that might catch sun or breeze. They compete lightly and lazily over whose shirt is whitest, whose breeches least. Torn, whose cravat has survived both mustard and blood. It becomes a sport, a game you join in without hesitation. One fellow, the kind who always seems to have extra everything, claims his secret is birch ash mixed with leftover wine. Draws out the smell, he says, wringing a sock with exaggerated flair. Another swears by boiling his undergarments with rosemary and pine needles. The lice hate the scent, he insists. So do most humans, someone mumbles. The sudden abundance of water is a luxury. Maybe it's from a nearby well. Maybe the quartermaster got lucky. Maybe nobody asked too many questions. What matters is that for once there's enough to scrub, rinse, and not immediately regret it. Even the officers get involved, though they don't do the work themselves, of course. Their valets dart between campfires, hauling delicate linens with the care of someone transporting a sleeping infant. You see one man pressing generals, gloves between two hot pans. Another is blowing gently on a freshly washed sash lips, pursed like a pastry chef, icing a tart. You watch amused as a pair of trousers, someone's best pair from the look of them, is laid over a bush like a sleeping cat. The wind flaps them lazily, almost approvingly. This is what victory smells like: a faint whiff of lye, wet wool, and hope. There's even music. One group of grenadiers starts singing a washing tune, something ridiculous about soap and love and muddy boots. Soon the camp joins in verse, after off-key verse, until it's less a song and more a shared ritual. A defiant chant, yes. We are dirty. But not forever. You find yourself smiling, really smiling, not the grim, teeth-clenched smirk of someone who just stepped around a dead rat, but a soft, honest smile that feels foreign on your face. You choose your shirt carefully, not the stiffest, not the most sentimental, just the one with the least number of holes. You swirl it in warm water, you rub it against itself, you watch the grime swirl away, like dark memories dissolving into the steam. A nearby soldier rinses his trousers, while describing in heroic detail how he once wrestled them off a fence during a thunderstorm. Another man claims his shirt was blessed by a priest and hasn't caught lice in 3 campaigns. No one believes him, but they nod respectfully anyway. This is what downtime looks like in Napoleon's army. No drills, no charges, just warmth, wet cloth, and a moment of being clean. Even the vivandiers reappear carrying baskets, laughing, scolding, trading tips on how to get blood out of cuffs. One waves a shirt over her head like a flag. It's not clean until it flaps, she calls. Someone tosses her a biscuit. She catches it in her teeth. Laundry becomes celebration. A private balances 2 tin basins on his knees, feet in one shirt in the other. 2 birds, 1 bath, he says, grinning. Another man sharpens a bayonet with one hand and rings a sock with the other. Multitasking, you rinse, you twist, you shake out the fabric, and watch it hang like a banner on the line you rigged between 2 musket stands. It doesn't smell great, but it doesn't smell awful, and that's a victory. And when the sun begins to dip and the fires start to burn again, not for cooking but for drying, you know you'll go to sleep tonight in something that doesn't reek of mildew and last month's stew. Maybe you'll even dream. Historians still debate the psychological effects of these laundry days. Did they actually boost morale? Or were they just tiny, stubborn acts of rebellion against the filth of war? Either way, they mattered. Because when you're cold, tired, hungry, and miles from home, a clean shirt isn't just fabric. It's defiance. It's dignity. It's something to believe in. The sea air is supposed to be invigorating. That's what they told you anyway. Bracing, they said. Clean, they promised. They did not mention the mildew. You're aboard one of Napoleon's ships en route to Egypt. It rocks gently, or not so gently, beneath your feet. And the hold smells like wet rope salted meat, and approximately 1,000 damp uniforms that haven't fully dried since Toulon. Laundry on land was difficult. Laundry at sea, practically a form of suffering. The first thing you learn, saltwater, is not your friend. It doesn't clean, it doesn't rinse, it doesn't even particularly wet the fabric in a helpful way. It soaks, yes, but it also stiffens, stains, and leaves behind an invisible crust that somehow makes your shirt scratchier than ever. You scrub your clothes in a bucket of seawater and watch them emerge dirtier in spirit, if not appearance. The second thing you learn, there's nowhere to hang anything. The rigging. Full. The lines are for sails, not socks. The officers get first claim anyway. The lower deck's perpetually damp. There's condensation on the walls, on the floor, in your boots, possibly inside your sole. So you dry your laundry wherever you can. Some string socks from cannon muzzles, at least until the captain notices and roars in horror. Others attempt creative balancing acts. Breeches on barrels, cravats over ladders, entire coats slung over crates of supplies that may or may not contain live chickens. It's like trying to do a delicate ballet in a broom closet during a storm. One man ties his shirt to the tip of a bayonet and jams it upright in the ballast gravel. It flutters briefly like a victory flag before falling into a puddle of spilled wine and fish oil. He does not try again. You are surrounded by the creak of timber, the occasional thunder of a wave slamming into the hull, and the omnipresent smell of bodies in tight quarters. The ship's cook has taken to calling your sock pile the cheese rack. You laugh. Sort of. There's no escape from the damp. It's in your sleeves, your waistband behind your ears. You change shirts, only to find the new one is just a different kind of wet. At some point, the captain declares an airing day. Everyone is ordered to haul their gear above deck and hang it to dry. A hopeful moment, the sun is shining, the sea is calm, you lay your uniform flat across a crate and stretch in the breeze. Then a wave breaks higher than expected. Everything gets drenched. Again. Someone swears so creatively that even the parrot tied to the mizzenmast pauses. And yet the sailors have tricks. They teach you how to scrub your shirt with powdered pumice and a bit of lemon peel. You try it once and come away smelling like sand and disappointment. Another trick, wrapping your wet clothing around a heated cannonball. It works if you don't mind singe marks or the risk of spontaneous combustion. Historians still argue whether this sea-soaked misery helped or hindered Napoleon's Egyptian campaign. What's certain is that the stench of mildew followed the army from the ships to the sands, baked into every coat and collar, like a terribly perfume. Once you land, you think it will get better. It doesn't. Egyptian heat turns your still damp shirt into a wearable greenhouse. You sweat, it soaks, it never really dries. And because fresh water is strictly rationed, washing becomes an impossible luxury. You start brushing the salt crust off your sleeves with your fingernails. It flakes like pastry. Unappetizing pastry. One inventive soldier hangs his underclothes from a tent spike, hammered into the sand, hoping the desert wind will help. The garments are immediately stolen by a goat. He gets them back, sort of. Even so, there's a kind of solidarity in the filth. Everyone smells. Everyone steams in the heat. Everyone dreams of bathtubs, soap, and a time before everything you owned smelled like brine and regret. The officers suffer too, just in more expensive fabric. You spot a lieutenant trying to dry his silk sash over a brazier. It bubbles, he panics, his valet blames the wind. The vivandières, yes, even here, manage to wrangle a corner of the camp for boiling water. They set up a laundry tent, hang linens from improvised racks, and slap the filth out of uniforms with a passion that borders on spiritual cleansing. One uses a flattened sword as a paddle. She's the most feared woman in camp. Still, you try to keep clean. When fresh water's available, you sneak a rinse. You hang your shirt inside your tent and hope it dries before nightfall. You dream of rivers, even the muddy ones back in Bavaria. You dream of soap that doesn't burn, of breeches that don't smell like fish. One day, by some miracle, you find a stream inland. It's not much, just a trickle, but it's fresh. You don't wait. You strip your shirt, rinse it with trembling hands, and lay it across a rock to dry. The sun beats down, a breeze stirs. For once, it almost works. And for the rest of the day, as you march across the sand, your shirt smells faintly of water and stone, instead of boat stew and cannon sweat. It doesn't last. But for that moment, it was enough. Even dirty linen has secrets. You sit cross-legged behind a supply cart, polishing your boots with the edge of your shirt sleeve. Yes, that shirt sleeve, the one still crusted with battlefield grime and old stew. It's hopeless, but the gesture feels calming around you. The camp buzzes with quiet activity. A few men are sharpening bayonets, others are playing dice, and off to one side, a vivandière is wringing out a soaked petticoat while singing something that might once have been a love song. And then you see it. A folded shirt tucked under a sleeping roll. At first it looks ordinary, stiff, damp, forgettable, but then someone picks it up, shakes it out, and from between the folds a small note flutters to the ground. A letter. You weren't meant to see it, of course, but you did, and now your curiosity is a living thing. Because laundry for many was more than just hygiene, it was communication. In the absence of envelopes or privacy shirts became the most discreet of messengers. Tuck a note in a sleeve, hide a pressed flower in a sock, write a message directly onto a shirt hem in tiny script with charcoal or old ink. It's primitive, yes, but in a world where paper was scarce and emotions scarcer, you may do. You even knew a fellow once, Lucas, who embroidered letters into his collar. Not entire messages, just initials. A secret code between him and a girl from Lyon. She stitched the first one he told you. Then I added one after each battle I survived. His collar was nearly full by the time he vanished during a rainstorm outside Dresden. Historians still argue whether soldiers truly used laundry this way, or if it's a romanticized myth made up by nostalgic memoirists and bored letter writers, but you've seen enough to believe it. There are too many missing socks, with frayed edges, too many undershirts, carefully folded in ways that suggest more than mere dryness. You remember your first attempt. It was a scarf, technically not regulation, but tolerated. You'd scribbled a few words along the edge in faded ink, Je pense à toi. You slipped it into a wash bundle bound for the vivandières. 2 days later, the scarf came back clean and tied, with a red ribbon that hadn't been there before. Was it returned by mistake? A signal? A practical joke? You still don't know, but you've kept that ribbon in your kit ever since. Love and laundry have always been entwined. In towns where the army passed through, soldiers would pay extra to have their clothing washed, not just by anyone, but by someone. A girl with a kind face, a man with gentle hands, an excuse to talk. Moment of calm. One soldier in your unit used to hum lullabies while folding his shirts. He claimed it made them miss home less. You never corrected him. Some got bolder, slipping pressed violets into shirt cuffs, tying knots in the sleeves to mimic hearts. One even tried scenting his handkerchief with stolen cologne, hoping to woo a laundress known for her disdain of smelly grenadiers. She returned it with a note that read, "Try again with less vinegar." Still, not all the messages were romantic. Some were warnings. One note found stitched into a sash during a campaign in Italy simply read, "Do not trust Henry." Another, hastily scrawled and hidden in a boot, listed dates, times, and a single name, likely intel, or perhaps just a forgotten diary entry. During laundry exchanges, messages were sometimes passed with the clothing itself. A shirt returned with one extra button, a pair of socks tied in a specific knot, a laundry bundle wrapped 3 times instead of 2. It's primitive code, sure, but effective in a world where most letters were censored, and most feelings went unspoken. You once saw a man weep over a scrap of cloth, just a piece of an old apron, but it had been embroidered with his daughter's initials sent to him by way of a cousin and a sympathetic washerwoman. That scrap was tucked into his shirt pocket for the rest of the campaign. You could smell it before you saw it lavender and smoke. Now, as you sit watching another shirt flutter in the breeze, you wonder how many secrets it's carried, how many whispers, how many silent messages never read. You check your own sleeve, no notes, not this time, but maybe next wash day you'll write something. Just a word, a thought, something to remind yourself that beneath the layers of grime behind the dirt and the duty, you are still someone worth writing to. And maybe, just maybe, someone is still writing back. The river is frozen solid. Not mostly frozen, not slushy and regrettable. No, this is thick, hard, unyielding ice that stretches across the landscape like a cruel joke. The kind of ice that groans ominously when you step too close and dares you to try anything foolish. You are naturally about to do something foolish, because you haven't washed your socks in 12 days. They smell like boiled despair and foot. Your shirt is doing its best impression of parchment, and your underthings. Let's just say they've developed a personality of their own. You're deep in Russia now. Napoleon's great campaign has become a slow-motion collapse, and the cold is no longer an inconvenience. It's the enemy. Laundry Laundry is fantasy. A bedtime story soldiers tell themselves as they scrape frost from their sleeves and debate whether a sock can double as a glove. And yet even now someone is trying. Just down the hill, a pair of grenadiers has hacked through a patch of ice with bayonets. It's taken them the better part of the morning. Steam rises gently from their bucket, which was filled over a fire using melted snow-stale beer, and from the smell of it, someone's experimental soup broth. They're boiling socks. Not because they believe they'll get clean, but because it kills lice. And in this bitter cold, even the lice seem offended to be here. You trudge toward the riverbank where another group is gathered around a rapidly freezing shirt. One man holds it up like a trophy. It's standing on its own. He taps it, and it rings like a bell. "This one's done," he says proudly. Historians still argue whether laundry mattered during the retreat from Moscow, with death, frostbite, starvation, and wolves. Yes, actual wolves waiting at every turn who cared about clean breeches. But that's the thing, isn't it? When everything else is falling apart, sometimes the only thing you can control is your shirt. And so you try. You chip a hole in the ice, you lower your hands into the water for half a second, then yank them out howling. It's liquid pain, like holding hands with a glacier. Your fingertips go numb almost instantly. Still, you persevere, you dip your socks, swish them once, then slap them against the ice like angry fish. It helps, or it doesn't. Hard to say. You've seen men try to dry their clothes by holding them over campfires. You've also seen those clothes catch fire. One fellow stood up too quickly and sent his breeches flying into the flames. He stared at them burning for a moment, then simply muttered, "Well, I hated those ones anyway." The fire crackles. You hold your shirt closer, turning it slowly. The heat feels good even through the stiff fabric. You rotate your shoulders, trying to get blood flowing again. There's ice in your eyelashes. Your breath curls out in short, frustrated puffs. And still you keep drying. The officers are no better off. Their valets are frozen, their luxury soaps gone, their fancy cravats stiff with sweat and snowmelt. You saw one captain yesterday with mittens made from scraps of his old dress uniform. Desperation makes fashion. Even the vivandières have changed. Their usual clatter of gossip has quieted. Their laundry lines are gone. They boil water when they can share firewood and wrap scarves around their mouths to keep the cold from stealing their voices. You hear one say, "If it doesn't smell, it's just because your nose froze off." The humor helps. Sometimes you gather around the fire and tell laundry stories, not battles, not comrades lost, but shirts. Remember when Pierre used gravy as detergent? Remember when Leon tried to press his cuffs with a frying pan and left egg on them for a week? It sounds silly, but it's safe. A topic you can joke about, a way to remember the men as they were laughing ridiculous trying to stay human. Tonight, you boil your shirt. You rip open a pouch of dried herbs you were saving for soup bay leaves, maybe a sprig of thyme. You toss them into the pot with your uniform. Why not? It's not like you're going to eat again soon. The smell is not terrible, it's almost pleasant in a rustic forest floor sort of way. You fish the shirt out with a stick. It's limp, steaming, oddly comforting. You wring it out with trembling fingers and lay it across your knees. And for a few moments, wrapped in steam and bay leaf scent, you feel warmth again. You remember home? A basin of water, a window with frost creeping along the corners, a mother's hands wringing out a shirt and humming something soft and old. You close your eyes. Tomorrow you'll march. Or freeze, or both. But tonight you have a clean-ish shirt, a fire and memories that haven't frozen solid. And for now, that is enough. You wouldn't think something as mundane as laundry could shape the course of history, and yet, as you sit by your last campfire of the campaign shirt, steaming gently on a stick feet wrapped in cloth that used to be your underpants, you begin to understand it mattered. All of it. Every scrubbed hem, every boiled sock, every smoke-dreed coat slung over a bayonet. Napoleon's war machine was vast, grand terrifying in its efficiency, but like all great engines, it relied on tiny gears on people like you, trying to stay alive and relatively unscented in the middle of total chaos. You think back over all the places you've laundered clothes, a muddy stream in Saxony, a fishy basin on a ship to Egypt, a snow-packed ditch near Smolensk, a church pew in Austria turned into a drying rack. Your shirt has traveled as much as you have, possibly more. It's seen battles, retreats, friendships, frostbite, and love letters. It is your timeline, your armor, your towel cloak and occasional pillow. And yes, it smells like soup more often than not. Even the officers perched above the madness in their crisp frock coats, new laundry kept the illusion going. It made you feel like a person. It made them look like commanders. A clean cravat, a polished button, a pair of pressed cuffs. These were symbols, not of vanity but of survival. Historians, those cozy, inky-fingered types, still debate whether poor hygiene in the Grande Armée contributed to the fall of the campaign. Lice spread typhus-damp uniforms caused pneumonia. Boiled socks saved lives. Or didn't. It's hard to quantify the power of a warm shirt in the middle of a Russian winter. But you know that on the bleakest day when rations ran dry and men dropped in silence, it was the simple act of wringing out a shirt and draping it by a fire that gave you just enough hope to keep moving. You know that when a letter tucked into a pair of breeches reminded you of home, it felt like a miracle. You know that even when your shirt was too stiff to fold, you still folded it. Because that's what people do. Not animals, not ghosts, people. Tonight your shirt is clean. Well, clean enough. It's missing a button, the collar's torn. One cuff is permanently scorched from that time you got too close to a campfire while trying to press it with a hot rock, but it's dry. It smells of smoke and lavender, or maybe just someone's lost soup herbs, and it hugs your shoulders with the tired comfort of something that's been with you through everything. You look around, the fire is low, someone's humming a tune that might be a lullaby or just the sound of exhaustion. The vivandière who once scolded you for not folding your breeches is curled up near the ashes using a wool coat as blanket. And so you settle in, you pull your shirt close, you let your head rest on your pack, and as your eyes begin to close, you whisper a quiet, sleepy thanks to the shirt on your back. Not just for being clean, but for being there. The fire crackles softly now, little more than glowing embers, their orange light painting shadows that stretch long and slow across the ground. You feel the warmth curl around you, not hot, not sharp, but gentle, like memory of warmth still echoing in your bones. The night air is cool, but your clothes are dry, for once. Not damp, not stiff, just warm enough to let your muscles settle, let your shoulders drop from days of holding tension you didn't even know was there. The wind sighs across the field, carrying no battle cries, no drumbeat, just the hush of leaves and the flutter of a lone sock swaying from a low-hanging branch. It squeaks slightly as it turns. It's almost funny, almost poetic. You breathe in slowly, smoke wool, something green, something calm, and you exhale even slower. The sounds of the camp have faded to murmurs, a snore here, a whispered prayer there, someone dreaming perhaps of home or soap or clean river water that isn't frozen solid. You are still. And the shirt wrapped around you, singed and stained and impossibly familiar, feels like a soft shield against the dark. Let it all drift. Now, the cold, the noise, the miles left to march, there's no need to carry them into sleep. You've done enough. You've washed enough. You've survived enough. Now rest. Let the night take you gently, like a warm hand guiding you toward dreams that don't smell like vinegar and bay leaves. You are safe here. You are warm here. You are clean enough. Sleep well,